Welcome back to the R.M.Williams Outback podcast. Great to have you here. This is Terry Cowley. I'm the host of the podcast and also the senior associate editor of R.M.Williams Outback magazine. We're very grateful to Ram Trucks for sponsoring this podcast. For many people, a trip down the fabled Canning stock route is a bucket list adventure, something you might get a chance to do once if you're lucky. As an experienced guide and self-taught bushman, Brendan Eblen has travelled the route some 20 times. To him, the magic of the Canning is found not simply in navigating the single-lane track from Halls Creek to Willoona, through 3 deserts and across 1,800 kilometres. Rather, it's the stories of those who came before, the history and the chance to share fellowship and understanding with others that not only propelled him down that track, but which carry him through life. Brendan is known across the South Australian outback as a house painter, a cook, a storyteller, and a Royal Flying Doctor Service fundraiser. He is one of 20 wonderful Great Australians profiled in our latest Outback Great Australians magazine. Brendan joins me now. Welcome, Brendan.
Thank you, Terry.
Brendan, you're the son of Lebanese immigrants and you spent your early childhood in Adelaide. Perhaps that's a good place to start the story. Things must have changed when your parents bought an orchard near Paringa in the Riverland.
They certainly did. That was a complete contrast. My father was a truck driver and my mother was domestically involved at home, but she was actively also involved in her family endeavours in the clothing industry. It was my grandparents who suggested that it might be an enterprise that our family could get involved in. 2 young boys can help work out on the fruit block. But my parents weren't experienced, but my father didn't lack the energy to make it work, and my mother was right alongside of him. But the industry suffered a lot, and it caused my parents probably a lot more hardship that they didn't really need. And ultimately, the place was sold, but it was a very interesting time of my life. I think, the red sand around the Riverland area out of Paringa, just the country, the living. I certainly missed it when we moved to town, but then I became more urbanised and found other ways to enjoy myself. I've always been interested in camping and travelling on the roads out and about the place.
So the family eventually returned to Adelaide and then you were sent to high school there. What was that like for you?
Quite a change, really. I'd hoped to continue with ag science as I was in the Riverland at Renmark High School. But when we got to Adelaide, the very convenient location of the school I did go to never offered the subject, and I just went down a sort of academic pathway without the rural influence. And in some ways, I just took what was available to me. My parents weren't wealthy. I just went where I was asked to go as a young person and made my own way later.
So you ended up leaving school fairly early to take up a job as a storeman in the paint industry.
Yes, well, I'd probably not been a happy student, and I wanted to join the army, and my father said, well, no, that's not going to happen because we're talking about the Vietnam War and that sort of stuff, because my mates had gone. He said, I'll find a job for you. I know a fellow in the employment area, and I went down and saw the fellow that was recruiting, and the funniest thing that I can recall about that interview was he said, look, thank you for your school reports and references. He said, but would you go away and get a letter from your parish priest? So I did that, and when I came back and he read it, this was a few days later, he said, I'll give you the job. We were pretty involved in the church, I suppose, in many ways. Lots of people were in the 1960s, 50s and 60s. But that started me off in the paint industry. The storeman side of things grew, and I moved on.
So in 1973, the paint business sent you to work in Port Augusta, which I gather was a really good move for you.
Oh, it was fantastic. I was still living at home at that time, 22 years of age, I think. And when I got to my new accommodation, it was a brand new flat on top of the building where the paint store was. And I walked in and I thought, wow, this is a brand new day for me. I'm going to make decisions myself. My mum and dad are very close to me, but here I am on a day-to-day basis, opening up this new store in Port Augusta, and then having the whole world in front of me with decisions that were being made by me about my daily routine, like cooking and doing my washing and making my bed and doing all the domestic stuff that I'd probably really loved my mother for, because it was a fair bit of that she did. But it wasn't strange to me. I embraced it. But Port Augusta was just the right environment at the right time of my life. I was single. I had no relationship at that stage. I opened a store in a situation where to have a major paint distribution outlet in a regional setting like that became a very, very busy store. And I just immersed myself in the community, and wasn't hard to do because people were very friendly. I think I loved that friendly nature of community living and embraced it completely.
You got involved in the Apex Club and Gymkhana and all those great sort of community things that you can do in the country.
Well, Apex was the first thing that I became involved in. A dear friend, Rolly Milhinch, who was a jeweller in the main street, he just came to me one day and said, "Oh, it's an Apex meeting. Why don't you come with me?" I didn't know anything about Apex. I said, "Sure." He was probably the. In fact, I'm still friendly with Rolly Milhinch. He's just a great bloke, and he's done so much in those areas. But Apex led to other things. I ran the Apex Rodeo for a number of years. It was a great community involvement. It just extended that access to community to people in need, and I found that not hard to do. It's part of my DNA, I suppose.
And I mentioned the Gymkhana, that was something you were involved in for about 30 years.
Well, yes, and Rolly Milhinch again. His influence on me said, "I'm putting together a group to go to William Creek to the Gymkhana." I said, "Well, I'd love to come. What is it?" Well, you couldn't get me away from there after that. We'd get up there in the aircraft, the station would pick us up. Dick and Connie Nunn, our host at Anna Creek, would be put up out at the station, and then we'd be driven in. In those days, the Gymkhana was on a Sunday. Rolly managed to get a number of people involved at William Creek, and it was very much appreciated by the local community. And in my normal attitude to community involvement, I just found it incredibly appealing to me. I couldn't get enough of it. You couldn't get me away from it.
You ended up doing a fair bit of cooking there, I believe.
Well, a guy called Doug Eitzen said, "Hey, mate, we need a hand in the cookhouse." I said, "I'm with you." So over we went, and we're talking about hot days here with a wood fire, no gas, and throwing in the chopped up wood in the big Medders stove that had a hot plate on top of it, and the steaks just kept coming in. I mean, those guys, when I was so young and I looked at the effort they all put in, it wasn't hard to put your shoulder to the wheel with them because they valued your presence so sincerely. It's really been a wonderful thing. And I've continued to support it over time. I have also continued to financially be involved in it, continuing on from that even to today. And the young couple out there at Anna Creek managing it for the Williams Pastoral Company, a cattle company, they're just brilliant people. And a very healthy Gymkhana survives today. And to see all the young people in some of the photographic evidence on Facebook, there's a really beautiful young group of people, mothers and dads and kids, and it's just what you wanted to see happen in the future. And it's great to see the bushes in such good hands, and the Gymkhana is too.
Absolutely. Also in Port Augusta, you met your future wife, Pat.
It was amazing. You know, I was one of the lucky blokes, I suppose, because Pat was newly arrived in Port Augusta, and she'd made an arrangement to redecorate where she lived, and she needed to paint it. So she came to see the bloke at the paint shop. And when she walked in, I thought, wow, this girl's something. But she got me straight away. I thought, wow, this is me. I'm probably a bit impulsive by the sound of it. I find things I like and latch on. So Pat was a young lawyer, came to Port Augusta, and she needed to do some redecorating of the place she moved into, and I obliged to sell her the paint. And then she came in and needed more, and I said, how's it going? She said, oh, it's not really working out that well. I said, I'd better come and have a look. And the rest of it's history.
So you started your own painting business.
Yes, well, I got a transfer back to Adelaide, and I said to the management that I had really found a place I wanted to stay in, and no matter what the promotion was that I was going to get, I wasn't really going to leave. And they said, well, then you'll have to resign. So with that I did, and I had practical painting and wallpapering skills in any event, but I'd been pretty well trained in the technical side of the paint industry, so I was confident in that regard. And it wasn't hard, because that's the wonderful thing about a community. If they know that you're doing something and they can help you, then I was offered work by various people in the community, and I then established a very good painting and decorating business. And eventually some of my friends in business, particularly two fellows that were working up in the outback, a guy called Robert Farley and another fellow called Bob Burgess, who were both very well known and trusted men in the bush, came back and said, how about doing a job in the outback? What about up the Birdsville track? And I said, oh, what's involved? And they told me, and Mulca Station was it, and Kevin and Sheena Dorr were there. I went up because I wanted a quote, so I drove all the way from Port Augusta to Mulca one Sunday, had a look at the job, and the rest of it's history, because in those days, everything in the way of communications, we're talking about the sort of later 70s, 1970s, was all done on HF radio. And so I went up there, they accepted what I proposed, and then in a few months later I went up there, and as I was about to say, I guess the HF radio and them telling other people on the HF that they had a painter, well, next thing I'm at Anna Creek and I'm at Mundoudna, and I was also very much keen to be involved. I just enjoyed that community life so much. And then Luke came along, our son, and Pat said, I'm running a legal practice and you're not around enough if you do these outback contracting jobs. I think you better look for something back in Port Augusta. And that's what led me then to give it up and get into the cafe business.
Before we talk about that, when you were sort of going up and down the Birdsville track, you got involved with the Royal Flying Doctor Service.
Yes, well, that sort of came out of Apex in some ways. I ran the Rodeo in Port Augusta, and it was a fundraiser for the Flying Doctor Service. And they have, at that time, a regional committee, because the Adelaide base was only an administrative office. And they had a regional committee that had people that worked and exposed the RFDS banner to the outback and reported back. So I was invited to join the regional committee. And eventually I became chair of the regional committee. And when we moved to Adelaide, some little while after, I was offered a position on the board of the central section of the RFDS in Adelaide. And I did that for the next 24 years after. And I think it's a great organisation. I think it's just absolutely wonderful and not hard to be part of while you're running your own business and make the commitment to the Royal Flying Doctor Service. I mean, on some occasions I'd be out in the bush somewhere. I remember meeting the board over the phone in various station locations I might have been working through or passing by. But I was really keen to be involved and also to have the community support that the remote areas at that time were being given by the RFDS, and I was their ear to the ground from a travelling perspective, I suppose.
You mentioned you were called on to make the food when you were involved with the Gymkhana. And then when you were asked to stay closer to home, looked like you brought some of those skills back to the fore with opening a cafe.
Well, it was already an established business, but it had a limited offering on the menu. And when I suggested to Pat that I'd buy something like this, she said, "I can't believe you're even thinking about that." And I said, "Well, I like food and I like people, and I'm pretty adaptable." So it was a painting client, who was going to sell, and it worked out rather wonderfully, really. I remember the first day I was in there, I rattled a couple of cups of coffee to a table, and I said to the two ladies I was about to serve, I said, "Look, I'm going to have to go back and make that again because it spilled in the sauces." And from then on, I never looked back. I had great help in the kitchen, enthusiastic people. I wanted to be adventurous and try different things. We went away from scones and cheesecakes and stuff, and I started to bring some of my passion for food to the business, and it showed because Port Augusta didn't really have a restaurant, and this didn't open until late at night. It was really a daytime lunch and morning tea and afternoon tea. So I would produce French, Italian, Lebanese particularly, food, and I'd make cheesecakes and apple and apricot pies and quiches and roast chickens, and did all sorts of really interesting food. And the more diversified I made it, the busier it got. And at one stage, we had people out on the street, on the footpath, waiting to come in for a spot, while there are others lined up around the tables waiting for one to be vacant. And it just, the harder I worked at it, the diversity of the offering, and the more creative I made it, the busier it got. And that just builds an enormous amount of energy to continue to experiment and provide variety. And I remember one day I was doing something in the kitchen. I was making a Lebanese dish, and when you're cooking with spices and lovely ingredients, the side door of the shop, the aromas would drift down the driveway. And a fellow came up to me one day and said, "What are you doing in there?" "I said, "I'm getting ready for lunch." "Oh," he said, "man, I got to come back and have some of that." And that was the sort of enthusiasm you got. And like most things, if people acknowledge your work in such a way, it inspires you to continue to be good at what you're doing. And I guess that's part of what I do anyway in other things that I've done.
Absolutely. So after 4 successful years at the cafe, the family made the decision to move back south, settling in Harndorf in the Adelaide Hills, where you still live today. Well, that's a pretty nice place to pull up stumps, I must say.
Yeah, well, I'd say it's good. It's the only house we looked at when we came to Adelaide to look for somewhere to live, and we're still here. And every day I value how nice an environment it is that we have so close to the city on a small acreage around other small acreages. We've had cattle and we've had sheep. Still got sheep. Actually, a few lambs dropping at the moment. But having that time in the Riverland, I've planted fruit and nut trees here. Pat's got a lovely garden going. We really like the space. We have our friends come around to enjoy what we've got and what we've created. It's a really beautiful place to live, and it's quiet. It's our little piece of home, I suppose, that is away from all the busy business over the years. Pat being a retired lawyer and me just recently retiring from my painting and decorating business, we're just enjoying the time here.
You mentioned you have just retired from your painting business, but you did take it back up again when you moved south, specialising in older homes and becoming known for your incredible attention to detail.
Well, that's been a great acknowledgement over the years as a specialist in the restoration of older buildings. And I bring with it a number of skills away from painting, because older buildings are not just about paintwork, they're about the restoration of substrates, components of buildings that have suffered the time deterioration. And mostly when people bring you in, there's a fair bit to do about bringing it back to life again. And I have a special skill in that regard, because I can bring most diversified repairs in the way of carpentry and salt damp repairs and the like, as opposed to pulling things apart. I can remake them, and I've done a number of those things. My painting business has received 7 industry awards of excellence over the time, and I'm very proud of that. And I remember my accountant once saying that your clients are rusted on because I have no need to promote myself. The customers will find me, and then I have them for the ongoing time that I need. And I still have a couple of special little things that I do for people that need nothing major, but I can contribute to the needs of smaller projects that I may have had a specialist hand in, because painting is also decorating, and decorating is a number of different finishes that bring a range of options to the repainting and decorating of buildings, whether it be gilding or whether it be glazing walls or wood graining. And they're not just paintbrushes and rollers. They're very much a learned skill. And sadly, I think that might be becoming less available, I suppose. It's not the people doing it. Like, it's a very specialised area, and you do need to spend a bit of time perfecting it, and that's, the best part of my working life.
Fantastic. So when you left Port Augusta, you left the RFDS Regional Committee, but you continued to support their activities, and you made a number of journeys with the late Dennis Bartel, as he is now, sadly, including joining him on his final leg of his walking odyssey from the Gulf of Carpentaria to the Gulf of St. Vincent, which raised more than $70,000 for the RFDS. Tell me about your time with Dennis.
After I moved to Adelaide, I'm very much involved with the RFDS office because the public relations people knew of my involvement and my community focus. And I got a call one day, would I come in and join the publicity department to look after, for a week, the PR desk. And part of that was looking after Dennis's final leg of his walk into Adelaide. And we walked together from what's known as Jepp's Cross, which is quite some distance from Glenelg, but it took us the day to get there. And Dennis was greeted there by a lot of officialdom. And after it was over, he invited me back to his home, where we continued to have a friendship. And when I started doing the Simpson Desert trips with Outback Spirit, I thought I might give Dennis a bit of a tug and say, what are some of those things that we often talked about or I knew about that you were involved in? So that really got us going. He'd send me small segments of maps that he'd created. He was very passionate. So as soon as you indicated you had a willingness to be part of the country that he loved so much, in the way of travelling through it and embracing the special features of any travel, but particularly the Simpson Desert for Dennis, he followed me up passionately and gave me so much support. An inquiry from Sebastian Lipp from Pilatus to take he and his friends on a trip. During the COVID period, the canning was closed, so I suggested to Sebastian that we try the Simpson Desert, and he was all for it. And in addition to that, I proposed that I had a plan to put a plaque out on the French line where Dennis crossed over it back in 1985. And Sebastian embraced that concept straight away and said, Pilatus will provide the plaque, just give me the words. And so Sebastian said that they would be very happy to provide the plaque, and we could do that as a special event during the course of his trip with his friends. That developed into something where it was a very special occasion for Dennis to come out there. When I explained to Sebastian who Dennis Bartel was and what I was doing, this particular very afternoon I was on the phone to Dennis talking about the trip. Sebastian rang me shortly after the call was ended. He didn't know. He said, look, I've been reading about this Dennis Bartel. He's amazing. He said, do you think you'll come with us? Well, at that stage, Dennis and I had been discussing it, and Dennis gave a bit of time and came back to me and said he'd love to come. And I said to Sebastian, well, I've just found out that Dennis will like to come. So the starting of Sebastian's trip was not that Dennis would be with us, but ultimately he came with us and he made an amazing contribution to the information that you could get from somebody in the situation in the desert as we had.
And he was like aged 88 by that stage.
88 he was, that's right. He said to me at one stage, "Oh, look," he said, "this is the best Saturday afternoon I've had in years, Brendan." And we had a great trip. We really did.
And this is the trip that the editor in chief of Outback also went on, didn't he?
That's right. Mark came with us, and it turned into something really special because I don't think any of us expected that Dennis would be so animated in the situation we found ourselves in. We weren't just going on a drive and putting a post in the ground with a sign on it. We had this amazing contribution from a man who had been passionate all his life about travelling in the desert. I think the record of his movement into the desert and across it and about it is about 70 times, but I don't think the boys that came with us will ever forget it.
I'm sure you're right about that. So you're involved in many similar expeditions. You're an enthusiastic supporter of the project to recognise Tom Cruise, the famed outback mailman.
I was very much involved. In fact, I could not believe the sort of person that Tom Cruise was in the community. You only meet special people who have achieved but don't want recognition so very rarely. And Tom Cruise was one of those, quietly working away, didn't want to be made a fuss of. But when you read and talk with Tom, and I had many years with Tom, he was a very impressive person. And if you read Kristen Wiedenbach's book, there's so much that she got from Tom that's recorded that you can only but admire the man's performance and effort. It's truly remarkable. And when Ian Doyle, who was arranging this last mail from Birdsville, got in touch with the RFDS, I actually took a whole lot of RFDS souvenirs and so forth, because on that run we had, I would have thought, somewhere around about 60 or 70 motor vehicles that followed that mail truck from Birdsville down to Adelaide. And there would have been maybe 150 people at the celebration of George Bell's birthday and Tom's birthday in the Cooper, where we had a band and fireworks. And one of the really special things about that particular event was that the publicity that was given to get people to write to Tom in Birdsville with a self-addressed envelope, they would receive a letter with a postmark from the Birdsville post office from Tom, and it'd have a postcard inside it as well. There were 7,500 of those letters, and inside the letters, many of them had memorabilia. Some of them referred to the trips that they made as children on Tom's truck from Maree or from Birdsville back to Maree. There were little souvenirs in there for Tom. It was such a large volume of correspondence that when we got back to Adelaide, the public relations department, I said to them we could have Tom at a special function. Well, we had another couple of hundred people down at the airport in the hangar with the Badger and Tom and Valma, and a celebration and a handover of all of those beautiful letters that were written so personally to Tom. He was just amazed just how successful that was. It was a truly magnificent effort. And, Australia Post produced the postmark, the mail bags. They're all just like it was called the last mail from Birdsville. It's tremendous. The truck was resurrected from a dam on Pandy Pandy Station many years earlier and brought back to Adelaide and totally restored by a group of enthusiasts that had the skills that were learnt back in the day when the Leyland Badger was actually built. A guy called Ainsley Rowe was a coach builder, produced all of the panels, the new panels on that truck by hand.
Fantastic. Now, with your background of working with food, being so capable in the bush, many other attributes, it's no surprise that you would go into doing formal tours of the outback.
That came about because I'd been in touch with the Office of Outback Spirit in Albury, wanting to see if they would, after their very hectic Lake Eyre program in 2012, whether they would relinquish a coach. And one of the owner brothers, Courtney Ellis, said, why do you want it and where have you been? And we got talking about me having been out in the canning, and the timing couldn't have been better because they were planning their canning stock route safaris for the future. And I became very involved with planning and visiting the office in Albury, and eventually they asked me to run the tours down the canning in 2014. And a funny side of that was that I'd been helping out and visiting Albury, and I hadn't at that stage been approached to do anything physically on the trip. And Courtney had sent me a message to say that he wondered if I'd take up the offer of running the tours. Well, that meant that I had to move from Adelaide to Broome for 5 months. Well, I put 3 really good years in on the canning and enjoyed every one of those trips. So I studied that stock route history, the use of the stock route, the personalities that made use of it, the various events that happened out there, to speak with some authority about the history and the people that make up its history. And I was able to do that. And I would read poetry or read letters or things to my guests and make a special effort with the meals so that they weren't just tour meals. They were meals from a person with hospitality background that understood and understands food to produce something quite unexpected, I guess you could say.
So just perhaps in a bit of summary, Brendan, you spent a lot of your time in and around Adelaide, but it seems to me that it really is the outback that calls to you. What is it about the outback, and how does it make you feel? Why do you want to keep going back?
It's a very hard to describe because it's quite an inside feeling. I feel it just provides a level of quietness, not always around people, but even when I've been working out there, it's the space, it's the sense of where you are so distant from anywhere that you can soak up the night skies, the days. I mean, some of the weather's not been ideal, but it has all a cumulative effect of that sense of where you are that isn't achieved in an urban environment. I guess that's part of the reason why we live where we do, that we're not in the movement of traffic and people and crowded shops and things like that, which I find not easily done. Whenever I've come back from an outback trip, Pat often makes the mention that, it's been good for you, and she calls it my dose of the dust. I remember saying to Kevin Oldfield, who was at that stage at Mungarang, we were about to leave to move to Adelaide, and I said, well, it's been great, Kev. Thanks for everything. And he said, well, you're not going far. He said, you've been here too long. You've been around us too much. We've got into your blood. You'll be back. Well, that was 1985, and he was right.
He was certainly right. Thank you, Brendan. You can get a copy of Great Australians from good newsagents and directly from us at www.outbackmag.com.au. Profile of Brendan also appears in issue 155 of Outback magazine. Thanks again, Brendan.
Great, Terry. Thank you for asking me. I think this whole episode or experience with being able to talk about things like this is really special. Thank you.
I'm sure it'll be special for your listeners too. And thank you, listeners. Please tell your friends about this podcast. I'll talk to you in the next episode.